don't want an AI model to write my scripts for me. I have a very particular, I think any good screenwriter has a particular lens on the world, a unique lived experience, and that's what they're there to express.
This is the only pure thing in this world.
With Fire and Ash coming this December, a lot of folks, including myself, are going back and rewatching The Way of Water. I'm wondering if there's anything you feel like people should really pay attention to on the rewatch to get them prepped for Fire and Ash.
I think people have an opportunity to refamiliarize themselves, with the characters. So obviously all the characters in The Way of Water continue on into Fire and Ash, and then we get a number of new characters. One in particular, Varang, of the Ash clan, who's quite important. I would say, just go for the ride. I don't think you have to think of it as homework, right? I mean, obviously the events that happen to the Sully family and the way in which they interact and the way they kind of bond together and support each other is a critical part going forward into the new film. But all those bonds get challenged as they get torn apart. Neytiri from Jake from his kids. The things that happen in two inform the kind of the psychology and the emotions of the characters in, what I think of as Avatar 3. So I don't think there's anything particular. There's no clues. You don't need to see The Way of Water to enjoy Fire and Ash. It's its own thing. But, if you're a fan and if you want to get back into that headspace and get back into following those characters, I think it's a great warm-up.
I know we have to be very cognizant of spoilers, but obviously a huge storyline through Way of Water is the origins of Kiri, of Sigourney Weaver's character. Is there anything, will we get any sort of resolution in Fire and Ash as to where she comes from, what her deal is?
Yes. The answer is yes. I don't want to tell you what that outcome is, but, Kiri remains a bit enigmatic at the end of 2. She's the only question that's not answered. She's the only plot point that remains unresolved. Right? And so going into 3, those questions remain. You get a lot of answers, but I can only say that it deepens the mystery. So you'll get some clues, you'll get some legit answers, but her story is meant to be a running thread across the whole saga. She becomes, I think, a much more compelling character in film 3. Much more central to the outcome. I mean, Jake and Neytiri are always central, and the other kids are critically important as well. In fact, Loak, played by Britton Dalton, is actually the storyteller in movie 3. So whereas Jake was the voiceover narrator of movie 1 and movie 2, we hand that baton to Loak. And that's really more about triangulating on what's happening with his parents and about his relationship with the family and feeling like an outcast and an outsider. We hear it in his words, in his voice. I think it's important to think of 2 and 3 as a complete story that fully resolves. A new stories, if we get to movie 4, I want to emphasize that, because, it all depends on whether we're successful this time. So 4 and 5 are their own story, and we'll make those films together if we make them. But 2 and 3 form one complete kind of story arc.
Your goddess has no dominion here.
I know there has been some discussions about where the story goes in the future, and that we might see Earth at some point in the Avatar storytelling. I don't want you to spoil anything, but I'm wondering, in your films in the past, you very much had a point of view of what happens on Earth in the future. And I'm wondering, how you get in that headspace of projecting into the future. Is it different than maybe what you thought and what you've done in like Terminator or other franchises, what the Earth is going to be like in 200 years or so?
Look, I don't think anybody can predict what's going to be happening in 2 years. We're on the cusp of an AI revolution right now. We're in a much more precarious world than I believe we've been in for the last 20 years or so. Climate change is actually coming to a head as well with the wildfires and massive deforestation and all that. I don't want to sound like a downer, but we gotta come to grips with the next decade. 200 years from now, I don't think anybody can predict. We could have a thriving civilization, or it could be nothing but cockroaches and tumbleweeds. The Avatar movies take you to another place and another world, a world that's kind of fantastic and aspirational and beautiful, and that creates a kind of a longing for the nature that we are sort of slowly turning our backs on this world. So it's a cautionary tale, but one that kind of offers a guidance, right? Which is to reconnect with each other, reconnect with nature, put things in balance in this kind of runaway freight train of a society that we live in. So I think whether it's the first film or whether it's The Way of Water, which is quite beautiful and in a way aspirational, wouldn't we all want to live in that ocean village? Wouldn't we all want to ride cool ocean animals and all that sort of thing? It also offers a warning in balance. For me, these films are about the kind of the darkness and the light that exists within us, right? It's not about humans versus Na'vi. It's the Na'vi kind of represent our better nature, and the humans in the story represent our more venal and greedy and less empathetic nature. So we're sort of writ large in the film. You see that in 2. You'll see it again in 3.
I want to shift a second to just talking about the technology of both, the first movie and Way of Water, and moving into Fire and Ash as well. You've obviously been at the forefront of a lot of technological revolutions in filmmaking. Is there something that you see as the definitive next step?
I think Gen AI does offer a lot of potentialities and a lot of threats to our creative purpose in life. I think a lot of things are going to change over the next few years. I don't think what's going to ultimately change for me is storytelling with actors. I don't want an AI model to write my scripts for me. I have a very particular, I think any good screenwriter has a particular lens on the world, a unique lived experience, and that's what they're there to express. That's what directors do, that's what actors do. I think it's important to point out that we've managed to get this far making these gorgeous Avatar movies with 0 Gen AI, So now you're really talking about how Gen AI might impact business models. Avatar films are quite expensive. If we could use generative AI, and I don't know the answer to this, if we could use it to be more efficient, to bring costs down in VFX, then more films like Avatar, more fantastic films, science fiction films that use a lot of VFX, maybe even historical dramas that need VFX to create a different world than the one we live in right now. More of those will get greenlit, because right now everybody's kind of terrified to greenlight, big expensive films, and a big part of that expense is visual effects. So is that a potential solution? I'm going to explore that, but what I will never do is replace what I think of as the sacred creative act, which is writing, creating characters conceptually, then working with actors to bring those characters to life, then working with artists to put them in a world. For me, that must never change.
Going back to Way of Water, is there, looking back on the making of that film, was there one shot, whether it be creatively, technologically, however you want to frame it, is there one shot in that movie that you are most proud of?
I think there are a couple of things. There's a shot and there's a scene. There's a shot that was proposed in the art department, just in a beautiful painting of Lowak touching the fin of Payakan, and it forms this gorgeous horizontally composed frame and cinemascope aspect ratio, and it's almost in a way symbolic of the movie and thematically for Avatar. It's like a character we relate to. He's not human, but he looks human, in silhouette, touching kind of the mighty and majestic figure of this character who's non-human, who in a sense represents nature, and that's what the films are about. And I thought that that synthesized that movie or symbolized that movie perfectly. In terms of a scene, what I'm most proud of is the actor's work in the scene where the eldest son, Natam, dies, and how the actors chose to play that scene. It was a scene we all dreaded. We knew it was coming. Everybody was prepared in their minds. But Sam and Zoe, as parents, they were young and single when we did the first Avatar, and they were, they'd been through some of the trials and tribulations of parenthood by the time we got to the second and third films, which we shot together. It's important to remember we shot those films together. But the death of Natam is a scene. First of all, not only am I proud of the work, meaning the acting work, it always brings me to the edge of tears, even though I've seen the movie 1,000 times. Just Zoe's just heart-wrenching scream, juxtaposed in the same moment with Jake's stoicism. Damn! He doesn't know how to grieve. He doesn't know how to let it out. He's already processing the situation, in a protective mode for the other characters. And just the juxtaposition of those two characters and, just the actor's work overall in that scene. I'm always proud of that scene. And it's not what people think of when they think of an Avatar movie, but they should. But I think when people think of an Avatar movie, they think of it as a kind of sprawling science fiction epic with beautiful scenery and lots of action and adventure. They don't think of it as this deep kind of heart-wrenching experience. And I like to say that the films are about dynamic range, right? There's beauty and wonder. There's fear, chaos, action. There's heart-wrenching emotional moments. And I think that is even more so true in Fire and Ash.
No, no, no.
Expanding that out, is there a particular shot in your whole career, in your whole your all of the films that you've made, is there one shot that you can pick that you can point to and say, that's the one I'm the most proud of, that is the quintessential James Cameron shot?
I don't know about quintessential. I mean, when I think across my films, my 9 films to date, I think about the kiss at the bow in Titanic. And I think about that because today we can do anything with CG. We can create the most beautiful sunset. We can create the most beautiful sky. We can create the ship. It's all very straightforward now. Back then we had to build the damn thing, and we had to have a real sunset, and we had to catch that moment. And I often ask myself, there's a kind of a brooding nature to that sunset. It's got these kind of glowering purple clouds, but then there's this bright band of gold and orange at the horizon. If I was designing that shot from scratch, would I have chosen that sky? Probably not. I would have chosen something more splendid, something we would all agree on as a gorgeous sunset, as opposed to something that was what nature served us in that moment. And those two actors had about 4 minutes to prepare for that moment. We got 2 takes, one of which is completely out of focus and one of which is partially out of focus, and that's the one that's in the movie. And if you watch it, it's out of focus as the camera moves in, and then it comes into focus, and the majority of it is in focus. And it's just this beautiful acted moment and the confluence of events. And we've evolved out of that world into a world where you can create anything you can imagine. The question is, would I have imagined that moment exactly that way? Maybe not, or maybe it would have been cool anyway. I'll never know.
Flying!